the one and only, the leader, the entrepreneur, Will Humphreys. Yay!
Hello. Thank you. The applause, I appreciate. I'll give you guys your money afterwards. And Dini, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I always will start this with a huge thank you to Hods and the wonderful opportunity it is to be here with all of you today. I understand very much so how crucial your time is today. I know that all of you have other things that you should be doing or could be doing, but you're here because you're taking time to invest in yourself. And I want you guys to know that I first of all want to acknowledge everyone for creating time in their day to work on themselves. And I promise you that I am aware of that. As a matter of fact, I create these with my heart bled into the content because I want you to get maximum value in the shortest amount of time. And so this particular day, we're going to be talking about one of my previous pain points. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this before, but as a leader, there were times in my career, multiple times, where I felt absolutely like the only person who could solve the problems. I was the chief problem solving officer of my company. I was in a position where I was constantly trying to balance the many divisions of my company, and it felt like they all came down to me. And I had leaders. That's the thing, is that I had a team, but so often I felt like I was like having to fill in their gaps. I don't know if you guys have ever felt that way or ever felt like, like maybe there's something wrong with me because I don't know how to get the right people or the right leader training or whatever it is. Either way, I was the person who felt it. And if you've ever felt that way, this is your webinar. Because today what we're going to be getting into are going to be the 5 mistakes that we commonly make in developing our leadership. And so, guys, to start things off, I want to remind you of my journey professionally. I am now what I would consider an entrepreneur, but when I first started my company, I don't think I realized that I wasn't an entrepreneur. I was a guy that owned his job. I was in Florence, Arizona. I started my clinic in 2003 with Nathan Shields, who's another one of the celebrities who'll be talking to you guys shortly. And ultimately, I was so happy. I had this dream that if my company could gross 6 figures, 100,000 gross, 6 figures, like life couldn't get better for me than if that ever happened. And what I quickly came to realize is Michael Gruber, the author of the E-Myth Revisited, says, is that I really wasn't an entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneur with schizophrenic visions of ownership, meaning that I was constantly bouncing around my business. So ultimately, I came to realize the truth of this one phrase that comes up in the book, Good to Great. Who first, then what? Who first, then what? And the reason that's so important is because the right people are the ones who make the dream work. The teamwork makes the dream work. And so for any of you, no matter what your goals are, I promise you, whether your goal is to create a practice that you can treat electively within your practice, or if you want a practice that's like an asset that you're able to run passively, or anything in between, the right team, the right leadership is absolutely crucial to making that happen. So that all being said, I'm going to start off with some engagement. Guys, I'm I loved it. I can't see your faces, which makes sense considering how many of you there are, but I would love everyone to go to the chat button. I don't know if I'm pointing it to on your screen or not, but in that chat button, I want you guys to put 0 to 10, 0 being that I have absolutely no leadership support, 10 being I have so much leadership support that my business runs on its own. For those of you who would feel comfortable putting that in there, 0 to 10, what would you say your number is? And yes, I'm waiting for answers. So, okay. And thank you for contributing, Scott, Harry, thank you. Love it. Some of you are probably figuring out how to use the chat button for the first time. So as those numbers keep coming in, I want to acknowledge the fact that most of us are trying to get to that 10. And I almost want you guys to recognize that it's a summitless mountain. Leadership development is a process by which that it takes the majority of our time in our careers to develop. But the key mistakes that people make, the top 5 mistakes, have to be resolved first in order for that to happen. So thank you, Bonnie. Got it. So we have various degrees, but you're all within a range of, you have something in place. You just know it could be better, if I'm hearing these numbers correctly, if I'm reading that correctly. That's great to know. Obviously, I would expect that from you, because you wouldn't have the time to be in this type of meeting if you had zero. If you were 0 to 4, probably not in this meeting. And if you are in this meeting and you have 0 to 4 on that 0 to 10 scale, congratulations. You are really doing the right things. This is the first thing you should do to get out from underneath your company. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to get right into it, boys and girls. All right, here we go. The top 5 mistakes owners make in developing leaders. And yes, that's my real middle name. I don't know. So let's get right into it. Number 1, and the most important one, hopefully this is one that everyone in this group has already conquered, is they don't get trained themselves first. We can't teach what we don't know as owners of companies. The thing that I would ask you to consider is, when you review yourself as a leader, which is where our leadership training programs all begin. How are you currently in your training? Is training something that you do systemically? Is it something that you maybe aren't perfect on, because no one is, but are you fairly consistent in reading and finding books? Are you talking and making time for webinars like these? The training is a never-ending process. Again, it's something that we have to do first. It's kind of like learning the piano. We can't teach others how to play until we've learned ourselves. That doesn't mean we have to be masters of the piano, but we need to be a couple of lessons ahead of our top leaders to be able to mentor and guide them. Now, the good news is that even though learning to become a leader and training is a bit of a summitless mountain, at the same time, it's one of those things where you do get to certain plateaus where your company is able to survive and grow without you being the chief problem solver, or in a way to where you're satisfied with your goals. So there's various resources out there. I put a few of these in here. This is reiterated on various webinars, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I don't want to just rehash what we've talked about, but it does highlight the importance of what they are, because people keep bringing them up, is that everyone should have 2 things as a leader. CEOs of companies and owners should all have 2 things. They should have a coach, and they should have a networking group. This is something that's been proven in Forbes magazine and other groups. Steve Jobs had a coach. Like there's quite literally like a science to becoming a better leader. None of us, I think, went to school specifically to run a business. And so this education comes, one in part through experience, and another part through exposure to people. And who we are in 5 years is a direct relationship to who we're with and what we read. So the books we read and the people we surround ourselves with. So there's a group called Survival Strategies. Craig Fiera is a part of HODS, the wonderful organization that sponsors this. And he owns a company called Survival Strategies that the whole purpose is to provide training. I can vouch that they are a powerful group and do an effective job of training not just leaders, but people on your own team to become leaders. There's other groups out there that were essential in my growth. I was a member of a group like Survival Strategies. And what I would say is another piece of something that was a huge thing for me, I'm still a member of. I've been a member of it for 12 years now. It's called Entrepreneurs Organization. Entrepreneurs Organization is a networking group. It's the largest in the world, not the biggest in the United States, but it's the largest in the world. And what it is it's a group of business owners who have businesses that gross at or more than $1 million a year. And they create forums, and they have monthly learning events, and you get exposure to business thought leaders across the country. It's an inexpensive way to invest in yourself. It's about an 8-hour a month investment, in addition to any additional like events that you go to. But being exposed to Michael Gruber, who I had the chance to meet and talk to, the author of E-Myth Revisited, which is one of our top recommended books, it changes us. Being exposed to these people, who we are in 5 years, is a direct result of who we know and hang out with and what we read. And not knowing where to start can be a daunting task. So having a group like Survival Strategies or Entrepreneurs Organization. And then there's coaching. So coaches are very important to maintain and hire. The HODS network, I've said this before, is hands down the best physical therapy network in the world. It's the largest, it has the most invested in it. So you have a network of people now, and I would still recommend getting a coach. So my partner, not ex, because we ended up exiting our business, but yeah, Nathan Shields, I can't recommend him enough. When we're looking for a good coach, there's two things that you want to look into. Number one is you want to make sure that that person has alignment with your values. And number two, that they have either been where you want to go or have coached others historically where you want to go. It's all about their exact experience. Coaching is a broad term, so you'll get people all over the spectrum there. So not getting trained first is the number one we make in developing leaders, which kind of bleeds into number two, is that we oftentimes don't have a hiring process specifically for our leaders. We don't vet them in an exact way, right? Like, so look at this first point. We often hire who's on the team because we need help. Like when we go to hire leaders, and I did this, I first looked at my internal team because it was the easiest thing to look at and just go, I need help now. Who's the best of my team? That's not necessarily the best way to go about finding a leader. The best of my team may not be what I'm looking for. I might need a skill set above and beyond that. And so that might require me to do the second thing that you see on the screen there, which is looking within and without of the company. You know, I had this coach named Scott Fritz. Scott was really powerful in my world. He built and sold a business for over $100 million. And he was someone that I hired out every quarter to do strategic planning for me and Nathan and I at the time. And he used to say this thing over and over again: trust the process. He'd whisper it, trust the process. We have to develop the process to trust. And that trust comes around knowing that it's going to produce the results that we want. And so as we look at these steps, remember that the first thing we need to do is create a hiring process for leaders that involves hiring, looking and vetting individuals within our company and without. Because sometimes that process is going to help us understand what the skill set and mindset of these people are. And lastly, promoting a skilled employee who does not have a leader's mindset. That's part of what goes into that. If we find ourselves hiring the best person on our team, sometimes what we end up doing is simply promoting from within, and they don't have the right mindset. So for example, in physical therapy, this happens all the time. I have a clinic, my top producing physical therapist, they're so good at physical therapy. They see lots of patients, people love him or her. And I go, yeah, you're going to be clinical director. Those are two very different skill sets and mindsets. It's not that that person can't be trained to become one, but depending on my need and my ability to train, that person may not be a fit just because they treat well. Does that make sense? So as we look through these mistakes, the second one being that we don't have an exact process, we're going to now go into the third, which is the actual process, not having a leadership training manual. Now, guys, what we're about to go over here is gold, because I have a feeling that number one and number two, you have pretty down to some degree. Maybe there were some ahas there. But do you have a leadership training program in your company? Is it written up? Is it something that when someone says, you know, I'd love to be a director or a leader in your company, that you could go, oh, let me give you this, and you plop it on their desk and say, why don't you look over that and see if you still want to be a leader? That right there is the missing piece for most people, because having our policies and procedures written up is what allows us to be really intentional in who we bring up and how well they're trained. So what does a training manual for a leadership position contain? Well, it's got to have those minimum requirements. Let's start with the easy stuff. Minimum requirements are things that you've determined are absolutely necessary for someone to qualify to be a leader in the company. In our case, what it used to be, and these are some examples, is that they had to have some time in the company. Even though we would hire sometimes from without, they would be hired with the intention of promoting at some point, but there was a minimum time frame where people would need to work within the company before they ran a team. And the second thing we always made sure was that they completed their training, and the training themselves, the manual itself contains some of these following elements. There were books that we would ask them to read. So what are the books that you've read that have something to do with the chair that you're sitting in right now? Those are the same books that your future leaders must read in order to qualify to be leaders. Some of our books were books like The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, Scaling Up, The E-Myth Revisited. Honestly, the list goes on, because over time, what developed us as leaders partly were these books. So we wanted our leaders to think like we think. Remember, the number one thing, our goal, our purpose in developing leaders is to take our DNA and to grow it. And our DNA is comprised of the experiences, information that we've acquired over time. So what are those pieces? Groups like Survival Strategies provide a consistent methodology for you to do some of that training. When it comes to leadership training, though, it's got to be your own brand. Remembering that when we start, after you go through the requirements, the thing that they want to make sure that we have to make sure our future leaders have is alignment around our purpose, values, and vision. That should be a requirement. Making sure that they see the world, our world, the way that we do. That's how we can grow leaders that can truly take information off of our responsibilities away from us. You also want to make sure moving forward that each training manual has elements of interaction, right? Like the way that I was trained on is that it's called creating mass. Whatever we do in terms of a training manual has to give the people learning it an opportunity to start applying that knowledge for it to become real to them. And we can do that in a manual through essays and tests. And then ultimately, that thing I was talking about, purpose, vision, and values, every individual has to be a cultural champion of your company. These are people who you never worry about going home and complaining to their spouse about you. These are people who you'd have 100% trust that if left in a room with other employees would represent you positively. Because remember, we're always looking for mindset and skill set. We can train on skill set, but we can't train on mindset. We hire based off of that mindset. In our company, one of the most amazing stories I thought was this guy by the name of Taylor. Let's call him Taylor. Do you know why? Because that was his name. And Taylor came into our company as a technician 8 years ago. He came in, he used to work for Chick-fil-A. Taylor was this bubble of energy, right? Came in super high tone and was our best technician, just like that, within 3 months. And so I used him to hire all of his friends because rock stars hang out with other rock stars. And so I ended up hiring a number of his friends as well. And so over time, he started promoting in the company because of his mindset. Now, I would tell you that we had tools like these in development during this process. Otherwise, it wouldn't have made sense. But eventually, he became like the president of all technicians or the leader of the technicians. He went on and on and on until he was my right hand for a time in our leadership team. And then when my company sold and merged, he became the director of care. So right now, he's at a director level in a $30 million physical therapy company, overseeing teams of people. The quality of physical therapy care falls on Taylor's shoulders. Mindset can make up a lot for what we don't have in place in terms of training. But when we have the training and the mindset together, 1 + 1 = 10 every time. Number 4, missing that hands-on experience. This is a common problem we get ourselves into, is that when we find the person and we have the training manual, we basically promote them to that position and change their salary and make it official. There's an intermediate step that is absolutely essential, which is that hands-on experience. They have to be mentored. So once the training is complete, the new leader needs time in that role to learn from their own mistakes after working as another Rockstar's trainee. Does that make sense? Like, so someone wants to be a director of a clinic, great. Well, we work it to where 1 day, 2 days a week, they're with, maybe if you have multiple clinics, they're with somebody else, or they're with you 1 or 2 days a week on the administrative piece. And so the leadership skills are learned like treating skills, right? As a PT, we all We all had various opinions of how school went, but we can all agree it was the rotations, the hands-on, promoting hands-on, the hands-on experience where our knowledge became real to us, right? So in both cases, as these future PTs get their skills in treating patients, and as a up and coming leader gets hands-on experience in handling a firing or a hire discussion or any other type of leadership role, pain gets relieved through helping improve independent function. That's what leaders do. We do it as therapists with our patients, and that's what leaders do as well. And they have to be with someone in order to learn that, even though they've read it, even though they've shared the cultural sauce, so to speak. And this is an important piece. We don't change a leader's pay until their skills are mastered. So what we do, let's say we have a person, a physical therapist that would be our strongest promotion for director. We want to put them as a director in training first before they get promoted to director. We explain to that person that the director in training role doesn't come with compensation yet because there's so much more learning that needs to take place. We need to spend time with them. We're going to continue to review the training manual with them. They're not firing, hiring, doing these things on their own. They're with somebody. And that takes time and money. But you do get that promotion. And in our experience, that was 6 to 8 months of being someone in training before they would officially become a director. In that promotion, we're just using director as an example. I did this as well for someone who was a CEO of my company. That we use that in training, and then once that time frame has passed and they were able to show and demonstrate clearly that they can execute those skills, then we promote them officially as director in this case and change their pay. So missing the hands-on experience and missing that little step called the in training is the fourth mistake. And then the last mistake is what I like to call the redundancy. Many of you, I am sure, have powerful leaders in your company. What would happen if one of them got hit by a bus tomorrow? That's the big question. So without these processes established, having things written up and a procedure for hiring and the in training done, without that being established, every time that we've been able to have success developing leaders, it's not reproducible. So even if you've been able to have successful leaders without what we just talked about, this number 5 is the last and most important step to secure a never-ending revolving door of leadership in your company, which is that every position should have a deputy. Now, this phrase can be used, you can use a different word than deputy. In our company, whenever we gave someone the deputy title, they would joke like, yeah, I should get one of those gold stars to put on my shirt. But the deputy title was basically another way of saying the second in command, right? So if a director would have a deputy director, another physical therapist or physical therapist assistant, depending on how you run your clinics, who would be responsible for learning that position. In an ideal world, having a deputy for every position would involve someone who would eventually like to take that over officially at some point. It's a way to go back to step number 4 for somebody else who's maybe a little bit further behind learning the piano than the person who's in charge, right? So the deputy position, in an ideal world, would be that person who wants to take it over eventually, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to be somebody who is responsible, someone who, drinks the cultural Kool-Aid, someone who you, again, can trust is going to be strong and supportive. And by the way, in your mind, if you're kind of right now, I get thoughts and impressions during these moments together. And I had this thought, like, maybe there's someone out there who's watching this, who's thinking, yeah, I don't have anyone that I could trust to be a deputy or strong enough to be that leader. Then we need to go to a different webinar that's about hiring and recruiting. Because if we're not emphatically excited to rehire each person on our team, then there's work to be done. And for those of you who've been in my previous webinars, you've heard me say this before. Every single person in our company, if we go person by person and ask ourselves, would I emphatically rehire them? And the answer isn't a resounding yes, then I need to coach them either up or out of my company. So when we're looking at leadership roles, this shouldn't be that hard of a process for a deputy position, because ideally this is someone who wants to take that post over but it might just be someone who just loves the company, who's willing to support that director, in this case of a clinical director. So again, every leader in a company should have a second in command who they are training up to do their job if they are hit by a bus or just simply absent for any reason. And without this role, what we as leaders constantly find ourselves doing is going down into the company. Think of our company like a building. The foundation is our purpose, vision, and values, and the walls are the people and the leaders. And our role at the top of the building doesn't signify we're more important. Every single person in that company has equal value. However, when it comes to decision making and leadership, there's a reason why a command line exists, right? And then we take some of those walls away. If a leader takes another job or gets hurt or injured, if we don't have multiple buttresses and don't have multiple walls holding it up, it becomes a Jenga. And every time a leader leaves, we've got to rebuild from scratch. So when you think about it, I want you to go back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of like having a process of hiring, developing a leadership training manual, which should be in your top 5 priorities if you don't have one, right? That is the blueprint of the building. The people are the actual walls of this Sears Tower. I got New York behind me, so we'll say Empire State Building, but ultimately, whatever it is that you're building, it has to have those leaders in place. And if you don't have that reproducible system, every time a person leaves, it's like a Jenga thing all over again. We have to go back down, we have to figure it out. That's when we feel as leaders like we're taking 1 step forward, 4 steps back, right? So yes, this is the key thing when it comes to leadership, and that is all I have. I didn't want to make this super long, but I wanted to make it impactful and distinct. So I do have times for questions if you guys have questions. Otherwise, that's the presentation. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to bring up?
Yeah, well, I just want to mention that putting people who are, they have real leadership spirit and attitude in key positions in an organization, it's very important for the transition that the existing owner is thinking to have for their organization. Are they planning to sell at some point? And are they planning to sell their company to a larger organization? Are they planning to sell to their current employees? But having individuals who are really getting involved and creating a culture of leaders within an organization will eventually pay major dividends down the line when you want to sell for your company to your existing employees. If you cultivate that type of culture and that type, put a program in place like this, or even if you decide to sell to a larger company, who they will come, they will review your organization, they will interview some of your staff perhaps. So having key people like this is very important, I believe.
Yeah, I love that, Danny. Thank you. And it's true. Having gone through that exiting process, leadership is everything. Otherwise, you personally will be tied to it. The difference between having good leaders and not when it comes to an exit is the difference between selling your company or selling yourself into a new job with a higher pay salary at that first year. So leadership is ultimately the opportunity that helps you open multiple doors. I had a really good question come through. Please ask any other questions regarding what's in the leadership training manual. If you guys have something that you do in a process that you're proud of, please bring it up right now after I answer this question. I would love to hear from you guys. What are some of the successful actions that you guys have seen in developing your leaders? So be thinking on that. And remember, the more you share, the more you help others. So the question that came across to me was, how much do I think it costs a patient or how much does it cost to lose a PT leader? How much does it cost the practice owner when a PT leader leaves? So it's actually not my opinion. It was something that I researched. When we lose any employee, they're depending on our systemization on average, in an average small business, It costs us 4 times their salary to replace them. So if we have strong processes, we can lower that number that help do that. Like McDonald's, they have an average turnover rate because their roles are so, introductory, right? Like very ground level. They anticipate a 300% turnover every year at McDonald's, but in a more professional, certified environment like a physical therapy clinic, it costs us usually about 4 times their salary. The average time it takes to replace a physical therapist in the United States is 6 months from the time that they've quit. Now, you may be better than that, but this is averaged out. And it can be very expensive when a leader leaves. And I think the thing that number doesn't even incorporate is all the emotional stress, all the extra hours that you as an owner put in to covering those hours. I remember key leaders leaving being like, well, I won't see my family for the next month. So there's an emotional expense that's not even quantified. That was a great question. Okay, question. If I were to select a deputy to learn the ins and outs of my position as the practice administrator, does that come with an exchange in their salary or wages? It does, but not with their salary or wages. It comes in the form of knowledge and opportunity. Your go-getters are going to love the opportunity to get trained to do these things. Now, if you're adding additional responsibilities as you're training them to actually take you over, it depends on those higher roles. Again, with directorship roles, we used to tell people directly, yeah, we're not paying you a dime extra because we have to spend all this extra money in training you. And when we used a company that was similar to Survival Strategies, they could see that. We would fly them to Seattle where they would get trained. And they felt, man, here's another cool thing. You want to talk about retaining your key people? If you get a leader, a potential leader who just needs training, and they see that you're putting money into their training and time with you, talk about a retention strategy. That's how you get people that feel like they matter to something bigger than their job, is because you put that energy and time into that. So no, if you've got someone who's a deputy, especially if you make that like a company thing, like, hey guys, every leadership position needs to have a second in command. You do it across the company, it won't feel to them like extra work. It's going to feel like a promotion, which is how you should present it. What are the other key books you recommend? Oh, I love it. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay, 11:42. So I'm pulling up my list. My go-to list is something that I'd be happy to send out to you if you guys are interested. For some reason, I can't access my notes. But books that come off the top of my head, The Richest Man in Babylon for Finance. That's a huge one. I'm going to pull up my notes on my phone real quick. By the way, if you have a book that you think is a powerful book, put it in the chat below, please. So, okay, I mentioned Leadership and Self-Deception. I didn't mention. That's my favorite business book of all time. The reason Leadership and Self-Deception is so powerful because it speaks directly into culture development. It doesn't teach you specific skill sets, but it will change people's heart sets. This was the first book that was recommended to me by my most expensive coach. We had my entire team read Leadership and Self-Deception. And this guy comes to me and he goes, hey, Will, I'm so glad you had us read this, because Mark, he really needs to read this information, which is kind of the exact opposite of what that book's all about, right? So I fired him. Not right then, but over time. And I'm laughing because you can laugh or cry, but that was it. Another book I love is Crucial Conversations. Oh man, this is so true. The biggest limitation we see in leadership is an inability to confront. Any success that I've had is directly proportionate to my willingness to have difficult conversations, period. Right? When I ask that question, is there someone on the team that isn't an emphatic yes on the rehire? That's a difficult conversation waiting for you, right? I've learned the quicker I get into those conversations, of course, the easier they are to hold. Let's see. So it's 11:43, just want to make sure. So again, there's various books based off of what you want to create in there. My list is something around 20 to 30 books, but these are essentials. In a leadership development course, I wouldn't go more than 5 books. Here are my top books recommended to put in a leadership training manual for your team. Leadership and Self-Deception, Crucial Conversations, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. Oh man, if you haven't read the top selling business book of all time, you got to go. It's a 2-hour listen at 1.5 on an Audible. It's a 2-hour listen on 1.5. And I do it every year, regardless, rain or shine. It's such an important book to read. Scaling Up is in my top 5, but be very selective. You have to work through that book first. That book is like a Bible in the sense that it's not only has a lot of information in it, but it's like a playbook on how to build a business. It is so cool. It's a summary of dozens of other business books. So what we used to do is take chapters out of that particular book, Scaling Up by Vern Harnish, and we'd give those to our leaders to read, and there'd be a discussion on it. And I would tell you, that book has the best meeting rhythm and system I've ever come across, honestly. And then the 5th book, I just had it on the top of my head. Oh, I had it right there. Sorry, guys. When it comes back to me, I'll let you know. I got all excited about Good to Great.
Oh, I know which one is it.
Which one is it?
PT Beyond 2020?
Yes, of course. Silly me. Yeah. You know, I did remember the 6th book, though. The 6th book is Good to Great. Good to Great is an incredible book for leaders to read. It talks about everything there. And I love Demi's book. I love that I know a guy who wrote a book. I'm going to read this out loud, James, if that's cool. Leaders need to be, this is from James. Leaders need to be a person that you would literally trust with the keys to the castle, or even with your children. I agree with that. Someone that you can rely on to handle the dirtiest personal situations and spreads only the most positive, supportive information. These are qualities you'll see in smaller doses, even when they start up with you. What communication are they forwarding to you, others, which staff they are friendly with, and what patients they have to say about them, etc. James, that is brilliant. And can I say that, like, one red flag for any potential leader, if you ever have a leader who communicates in generalizations and evokes emotion, like, yeah, all the directors feel this way about something, red flag. At least there's some training and coaching that needs to happen. Leaders operate in matter, space, and time of who, what, when, where information. This person on this day said this comment. No interpretation, right? Scott, 21, here's a book recommendations from Scott. Thank you so much, Scott. 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. John Maxwell and Leadership and the 1-Minute Manager. I have read the 1-Minute Manager. I love that. I haven't read the 21 Irrefutable Laws. Scott, would you be able to jump on and tell us about it?
Yeah, hey. So 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. Have you ever read John Maxwell?
I haven't.
Okay. Yeah, so he there's like actually a chapter in there. It's called the 4 levels or 5 levels of leadership. He broke out that book into like Leadership 101, there's Leadership 201, all that stuff. But it basically goes through the big takeaway for me was these 4 levels of leadership. So you have positional leadership, level 1, relational leadership, level 2, level 3 leadership was basically how you develop someone. So level 1 is I'm your boss. I do my job well. You're going to follow me, and there's only so far you can take that, right? Yeah. Dictators are really good at that, and they're very successful, but they only can go so far. So I'm your boss. I do it well. You're going to follow me because I'm successful. Level 2 is we develop a relationship. There's a bit more trust. So now you're not just following me because I pay your paycheck and I'm good at what I do, but now we're kind of friendly and at a professional level. Level 3 is now I've not mentored you. I've helped you to develop you as a leader and also in your job. And I've given you more opportunity in life or whatever because of that. So now you're going to have a larger commitment to me. And level 4 is the mentorship, which is more of a deeper thing that takes years to develop. And he calls it level 5, which is more like you're just such a big character. Maybe Demi's reached this, I don't know, where it's just like because of Demi, who he is, you're just going to want to follow him, even though you really don't have anything personal with him. So that's
I agree.
21 years.
I agree with that on Demi, and what a great, that sounds like an important, I know I've heard that name. That sounds like an important book to read, Scott. Thank you for suggesting it. And then Angie, the Go-Giver, I have read that, but when I think of a Go-Giver, I think of Angie. Could you give everyone a quick idea of what that book is?
Hey guys, that's just one of my all-time favorites, and it just basically talks about the laws of having this go-giver mentality of basically the more you give, the more you receive. And that's the whole basis of the book, and to do so and to give in an unselfish manner and in a way that you are not looking for receiving something in return. And the more you do that, the more that will actually come back to you. And that's been a read that I've read a couple of times, and definitely in COVID, I reread not only the Go-Giver, but the Go-Giver Leadership and the Go-Giver and the Go-Giver Marketer book as well. So love it.
I didn't know that they had those other books. In my mind, when I went through my top 5 that I would have used or have used in my leadership training, I would think that Go-Giver and Leadership and Self-Deception are kind of interchangeable in the sense that they produce a certain mindset, right? So, anything that we talk about, remember that part of what the powerful experience is in becoming a leader is determining what it is that you want your culture to look like. Like the Go-Giver is equally as powerful and an important book. And I'm going to go read these other, especially as I'm doing other things now, it'd be fun to see what the Go-Giver perspective is on marketing and those other areas. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. Well, listen, that's all we have today. I'm looking at our time. I'd like to start on time and give you guys a little transition time at the end, but either way, I want to thank you all for being here. Again, I'm not asleep to the idea of what you've got going on in each of your worlds in terms of timing and schedule. And what I love about this group is that I don't feel responsible for creating value. The value is inherent with the powerful people that show up here week after week. My great honor is to be a part of leading a discussion into that space. And so my hope is that if something that one of us said that inspired you to do something, that's great. But more importantly, there was probably something like an intuition during this time that occurred to you. And it may have been like in a totally different domain. Maybe it had something to do for your spouse or your children or a relationship that you need to step into. And I would ask you to honor that, because it's when we create space for ourselves in this that we hear the universe speak to us more specifically. So thank you so much for the opportunity, Dimi. As always, as a level 5 leader, we are grateful to have you leading the charge at this group. And James,
You're awesome, Will. Thank you, guys.